This is crazy. 51% are in favor of government putting the unvaccinated in designated facilities, and 54% favor imposing fines or prison sentences on vaccine critics. Free speech, anyone? Oh my God. Mass formation psychosis. Here we go. Okay, mass formation psychosis. So we waited a little while before we came out with this video because I wanted to make sure that we had a good case to make to really let this hit home, because in this particular subject matter, it's very important that people understand what exactly it's saying, because it's not as simple as just saying, well, everyone who is against vaccine mandates has mass formation psychosis, or they're all crazy. So this is something that can hit anybody and on any topic. So there are just conditions that need to be met for it. And we had covered a lot about this months and months and months ago. And it wasn't so much the term mass formation psychosis, although there were some videos Jack was sharing with me at the time, mass psychosis, which I will leave a link for in the description. But really what this is, it's a little bit more specific. The concept of it has been known forever. Every evil leader in the world, in world history, has used it to some degree, but in the modern era it has been used strategically. And we covered this a lot with Yuri Bezmenov, as he talked about. He's the KGB propaganda expert. We use a lot of clips from his video interview in 1984. He defected to the United States, was teaching classes on how the Soviets do this, but now it's been brought up by a professor of psychology at Ghent University in Belgium, and he holds a master's degree in statistics and psychology. And he's gone ahead. He's been working in group dynamics for quite some time. He's been engaged in this before the pandemic, and he had put the two together. Just his statistics degree actually is what got him on the trail of it. I was watching some interviews with him. He had turned around and said that he believed he was trying to figure out why, with the mathematical models initially being so off, why we were still going in the same direction that the mathematical models were pointing us. And the example that he used in one of his interviews, I've watched quite a few, and in one of them he mentioned Sweden, where the prediction from the mathematical model was that some 80,000 people would be dead by May 2020 if no precautions were taken. Well, you all know Sweden did not take any significant precautions, and about 6,000 people died. So, and which is not that far off from what would be normal deaths for a nation. So in the end, or for a nation of Sweden's size, I should say. So in the end, he wasn't thrown by the fact that the mathematical model was off. What he was thrown by is the fact that no one seemed to care or even acknowledge it, and that the protocols that people were demanding around the world and such were just still going on, regardless of the fact that the mathematical model was some 16 times off. So as he went through trying to rationalize this and deal with it and whatever, he finally joked and said, it took him some time to come to the conclusion that it actually was mass formation psychosis that was getting everybody looped into this mania. And he laughed about it, I say, not because of the seriousness of the issue, but because he teaches this stuff. So he should have known. So he kind of acknowledged that he too was caught in a bit of it, in a bit of the mass formation, because he didn't acknowledge it right away either. Right? So what is it? How does it work? And we're going to get into some statistics in just a little bit after I explain what it is. We're going to get into some statistics that are bizarrely disturbing and really dystopian, and really, Rasmussen had done some polls recently, and if you don't know how I feel about Rasmussen is the only polling agency that I even look at, that I even acknowledge. So when I saw Rasmussen come out with this, I was somewhat shocked at the results, because I knew things were bad, but I did not know they were this bad. So some of the things are just, and they absolutely line up like right in the wheelhouse for mass formation. And I want to kind of go over that a little bit. So whether you call it mass formation, menticide, groupthink, it's deeper than groupthink, but what it's basically being touted is that there are certain conditions that need to apply. So there have to be 4 conditions in society for this to actually take hold, right? And what he says, what Matthias Desmet says is this. So the first one is isolation or loneliness. So this is something where, in his opinion, has been going on long before COVID, but was certainly amplified with COVID, and that is, mostly because of our social media, cell phones, things of that nature. He highlights a few things like millennials and younger reporting much higher levels of loneliness and despair, so to speak, due to loneliness than do Generation X and higher. And this is all attributable to our phones, our gadgets, right? And that's where this all comes from. Because we disconnect. You think you would think social media would connect more people. It doesn't. It isolates people. It stops people from learning how to socially interact, and that creates this loneliness. And I know with the kids, at least, these numbers are through the roof now. Suicides, things like that are all rising in those generations. And the reason being is this fake world of social media, which is about to get worse with Facebook going with Meta, where they can create a whole fake universe for people to go crazy in.
They're coming to take me away, ha-ha. They're coming to take me away, ho-ho, hee-hee, ha-ha.
But I digress. The second phase is the lack of meaning or purpose. Again, all tied in with this. So you can see these two already being a part of what society has been, right? People are losing. People are falling into, I don't want to say depression, because I don't think it's that serious. I think it's just a situation where, there's a lot of loss of hope. All right. And I think that's where, regardless of what side of the political aisle you're on, there's just a feeling of loss or hope. If you're on the left and you're a rational leftist, right? So you're an old school Democrat, a classic liberal, so to speak. You're not a Marxist or anything like that. You're just an old school, classic liberal. You've been sitting here, you probably looked at Trump come in and go, oh my God, all is lost, right? And if you were conservative, then you were sitting down watching Obama and saying, oh my God, all is lost. And it may not be political. There may be other things in your life as well. But this is kind of this undercurrent coming under the country, which is by design, by the way, but coming out, this undercurrent in the country of just, meaninglessness and just despair and lack of hope was already situated right prior to COVID. And again, not an accident. Thirdly, we have free-floating anxiety and aggression. So what do we mean by free-floating, or what does Dr. Mateus mean by free-floating? Meaning it's not attributable to any one thing. So society is basically feeling anxious, on edge. The divisiveness certainly is a huge part of that. This untoward aggression, this nothing to really pin it to, right? And then the last piece is that there needs to be a single leader or entity, right, or small group that comes in with a single solution, right, after proposing something that you can attach your anxiety to. So here comes COVID-19, right? So very easy for everyone to attach their anxiousness and their aggressiveness to COVID-19. Very easy, right? Because no one wants these feelings of loneliness, these feelings of hopelessness, this aggression, this anxiety. Nobody wants this. It's not in our nature to want to feel that way. So the idea here is that once something like COVID comes out, all right, now you have something to attach all that to, right? And how does that cure the loneliness and despair? Well, because when the single leader or a small group of leaders come out with a single solution, and you've attached your anxiety to that despair, you attach your anxiety to that thing, right? In this case, he's suggesting it's COVID. So if you attach it to that, then now you're in with a group of people who are also attaching to that. And it's that collective nature that, number one, you're all working towards a goal to relieve that anxiety. And number two, it's also relieving that loneliness and that isolation, because now you've got a collective who think just like you. Right. So that's the preface that's the preface of what this is. OK. Now, as we look forward now, when this came out, it came out because Dr. Robert Malone had mentioned it on a Joe Rogan podcast. And this has been around, like I said, though, for a long, this is not a new concept. OK, but it seems new to some people. But when it goes on Joe Rogan, his fan base, I guess, we're not aware of this, and it just went nuts. And everybody was attributing it to Dr. Robert Malone. That's why I brought up Dr. Mateus Desmet, because it's not, Robert Malone tells you like he is learning at the feet of Dr. Mateus Desmet. And again, as far as it being a new concept, that's just not true. But with those conditions set in society, and those conditions were, in my opinion, and this is for YouTubers and for YouTube, psycho editing people, this is my opinion. Okay, is that this has long been this has long been in the works. Getting society to this point where something like this can become a big deal, was long in the works. And, I'm not going to go as far as to say for sure COVID was put out that way, but I'm not far from saying that either. That COVID was put out for that reason. We know it was made in a lab, so that's no longer drama, right? We were allowed to say that now. So in the end, we know, and I mean, I knew, long before that. Epic Times came out with a video on it like a month after the pandemic started. But I digress again. Once we get ourselves, into this mode, now everybody, here's the key, everybody who's bought into this, everybody who is clinging their aggression and anxiety onto this one thing, which in this case is COVID, once that's latched on, they will fight like hell, regardless of how irrational rules and things of that nature are.
Exposure to true information does not matter anymore. A person who was demoralized is unable to assess true information. The facts tell nothing to him.
Regardless, it doesn't matter, because what's important is that there's a source, there's a plan to relieve anxiety. The plan doesn't have to be rational. It doesn't have to make sense. When they tell you to, sit down, you can take off your mask, stand up, put it back on, turn around, do the hokey pokey, turn it all about, and that'll get rid. When they give you all these weird things that don't make any logistical sense, some people question it, some people don't. And I'm going to talk a little bit about Solomon Asch. If you're not familiar with the Solomon Asch experiment, where he actually took a group of people, he took 8 individuals, showed them one line, and then showed them another set of 3 lines. And then what he showed in those 3 lines, one of those 3 lines was exactly the same as the first. And they weren't close. Like the other 2 were way off in length, okay? He asked all 8 people which line is the same as the original line. Now, unbeknownst to contestant number 8, the first 7 were on the fix. Those guys were all in on the experiment. They were all instructed to select the wrong answer. They all did. And then 75% of the time, the 8th person selected the wrong answer as well. Now, they broke that down into as far as the group that bought in. And it turns out it was about 30% of those people actually believed. They actually convinced themselves that the line they chose was the correct answer. So they convinced themselves of that. There was an additional 40% who understood that was the wrong answer, but they answered anyway because it felt weird being the only person to answer differently. And then there was a final 30% who just didn't answer that way at all, gave the correct answer, and were like, you people are all nuts.
You're crazy. I'm a neurotic nut, but you're crazy.
Why do I mention that? Because that's the same percentage breakdown that mass formation psychosis has. All right. So when you listen to Dr. Matthias Desmond, he says it's about 30% of the population who are really bought in and will fight like anything to keep that narrative going. They will not let it go. And we don't know really if it's possible to turn them back into normal people. However, my focus is on the 40% in the middle, right? The 40% who know that it's BS, but they take it. They just deal with it because they don't want to. These are the people who they really don't want to get vaccinated, but they do because they just want to, just let me get on with life. Like they think it's all about that and that they can get back to a normal life once they get vaccinated, right? So I think most of us understand that this is not going away. Regardless, you get vaccinated, you don't get vaccinated. The problems that are around this are not going away. And so for that 30%, to me, it's on them to convince the 40% and really ostracize the 30%. Who are just not rational. I want to go over some statistics that Rasmussen reported, and this kind of backs up the entire concept. And I can tell you it's disturbing, but you can definitely, when you hear people like me bringing this up in context to, Stalin's Russia, Mao's China, the Nazi Party in Germany, when you hear me compare these things, Viet Cong, the list goes on, Valenzuela, etc., there's a reason for that. Okay, there's a reason for that, because those societies were in good places before these people took over. All right, but when they took over, these people cheered it on. They were not fighting this. This wasn't, Soviet Russia is not a situation where, the Russian people had to be conquered. I mean, they were willing participants in doing it. All right, they were willing. The Chinese, willing participants initially in engaging in this Communist Party. Right? This was not. So the question is how? How do people like that be? Even the Nazis. The people were willing participants. Okay, they were cheering it on. They were cheering it on. They all knew. They all act like they didn't know. They all knew. They knew exactly what was going on, and they cheered it on. Okay? So how does that happen? Well, mass formation psychosis is how that happens. And I want to give you some of these numbers. So just listen to this, because this is just absolutely nuts. So nearly half, 48% of Democratic voters think federal and state governments should be able to fine or imprison individuals who publicly question the efficacy of the existing COVID-19 vaccines on social media, television, radio, or in online or digital publications. That's 48%. Okay? And understand, that's not saying this includes vaccinated people to be imprisoned. Okay? This includes, yeah, they should be able to fine or imprison. It's vaccinated people too. It's just people who question. These are American citizens, all right? There's nothing sane about that. There's nothing sane about it. That is completely irrational, all right? But yet, there it is. And like I said, Rasmussen is not some flake polling company. These are the only ones that got the Hillary-Trump race right. They're the only ones that got the Romney-Obama race right. They're the only ones that have gotten any of these things right, because they don't engage in the craziness that the rest of them do, which is why I said they're the only ones that I ever take serious whenever they come out with something. And when this came my way, I had to bring it up. But this gets worse. Listen to this. 29% of Democrat voters would support temporarily removing parents' custody of their children if parents refuse to take the COVID-19 vaccine. That's much more than twice the level of the support for that in the entire rest of the electorate. 7% of Republicans, 11% of unaffiliated. I want to know who the 7% of Republicans and 11% of unaffiliated voters are, because that's just crazy. That's just asinine. All right. If you think that if you don't think that that's an insane point of view, then absolutely, you are in the mass formation. Absolutely. If you don't think that that's absolutely ludicrous, you are in the mass formation. Okay. And I just thought these statistics brought the point home incredibly well. And considering they came from Rasmussen, again, is what blew. I almost fell out of my chair when I read them. Okay, it's just insane. Among voters who have a very favorable impression of Biden, all right, so this is not all Democrat voters. These are just ones who have a very favorable impression of Biden. 51% are in favor of government putting the unvaccinated in designated facilities, and 54% favor imposing fines or prison sentences on vaccine critics. Okay, this is dystopian stuff. But it's coming from a good number of people. I mean, when you look at, if you look at even, just of the ones who are favorable, very favorable impression of Biden, we're talking a few million people here. This is not a few people, okay? So look, now the question is, can we, are these people salvageable? Well, Yuri Bezmenov says no. He says once, the Russians, the Soviets called it to be demoralized. It was phase one of a 4-step plan that they used, okay? And according to Yuri, even if he takes someone to the Soviet Union and shows them the gulags and shows them the concentration camps and shows them the stacks of bodies, once they're demoralized, once it's completed, they won't even believe it. Even when they see the bodies stacked up, they just won't believe it. They're lost. According to him, the only way to fix it is to raise new generations who have American patriotism, who believe that the country is good, who dispel Leninism, Marxism, communism, etc., and just you raise them right. That's his solution. Now, Now, Mateus Desmond is not as macabre, and there are some other, other people out there who are not as macabre either. I tend to think that these people are salvageable. However, I really think that people need to focus on the 40% who comply anyway, because if you're in that group, if you're that person who's, and I'm not hating on you, I get what you're saying, like you just want to get on with life, but you're enabling this. Okay, you're enabling this, and that's a problem. All right, it needs to be clear that the people who are in the mass formation are in the minority. That needs to be clear. And, some interesting things that Dr. Mateus was saying is that some of these leaders may not even believe this stuff either. They may also be caught up in the mass formation, and that's the creepy nature about this whole thing. Now, I know people on the left have stated, well, when they heard what it is, they're like, well, that explains a Trump supporter. And I got to tell you, there are some Trump supporters. There was an element of this with Trump supporters, with the truly maniacal Trump supporter. There are some people who have just totally lost their minds over Trump. And I think when he says things like this,
where I could stand in the middle of Fifth Avenue and shoot somebody and I wouldn't lose any voters, okay? It's like incredible.
Then you have to look at it like, yeah, all right, anyone who's, anyone, I mean, we all acknowledge it. I think we all heard it when he said that. And I think it's just one of those things where, once you come to terms with that reality, I think it just, you laugh. If you should be laughing, if you were someone who, who watched that and said, that's right, I don't care what he does, you were in a mass formation. Not the same mass formation, but a mass formation nonetheless. And I think it's important to understand that there is some element of truth to that. Because the point that we're bringing up here is that people be aware that it exists. It's not like it's a leftist thing. Okay, yes, there has been a targeted movement. We firmly believe that. That's been our opinion from day one. We've put together the case for that using people like Alexander Solzhenitsyn and Yuri Bezmenov, etc. But I don't think, anybody else is immune to it. So in the end, the one way you can keep immune to it is by knowing what it is and knowing how it works. And think to yourself, like when things become, like knowing that it exists and knowing that it's a thing, can help you to rationalize when you're confronted with something that makes absolutely no sense. It makes you more aware. It makes you more aware of it. So I just wanted to get that out. That was the light that I wanted to shed on mass formation psychosis. I be honest, I choose to say mass formation, even though it is a bit of a psychosis. I don't think it's crazy. I think it's human nature. I think the human mind is I think it's a natural process. I don't think that it's something abnormal. And for that reason, I don't like particularly the word psychosis, but some call it menticide, which I guess is even worse. These are all similar forms of the same thing. Either way, it is a classic tactic. It's not a new thing, and the mass media is all in. We all know that by now, right? But all of these things that are going crazy in the world, they are all connected. Don't get it twisted. They're all connected. We may not have all the answers for how they're connected, but I wouldn't talk about it if I didn't feel 100% that it were true, and I don't make an accusation that I don't put down as my opinion unless I have something to significantly back that up. So, as far as this being intentional and all that, I think we've put up enough to back up that there's definitely absolutely been a psych op going on. Shouldn't shock anyone. But the mass formation psychosis, everyone should know about it. So don't forget, that's all I have for you today. Don't forget to subscribe. We definitely have some videos coming out. Jack and I are both gonna be putting a video together. He's back in action. If you saw his clip in Georgia, he has just gotten to his home in Georgia and settled in. He put up a video of a quick walkthrough of his property. He's getting some snowfall out there, so a lot different than sunny California, but also a lot freer than sunny California. So he has fled the People's Republic of California and has successfully made it to Georgia. So he'll be back. He and I will have a little discourse over current events over the past month or so, and we'll be posting that shortly. And then also we'll be putting up a new video in the next episode of the Article 5 series for for Convention of States for Beginners. So look forward to that. Make sure you subscribe. If you're on Facebook, make sure you're following. We're definitely moving in great strides on Facebook as well. So thank you very much for your support, everyone who has supported, and I look forward to putting out some more content. All right, I'm out. Peace.
And like that,